My beloved child. Before you dismiss this moment as another ordinary message, listen carefully. There are seasons when the loudest danger does not arrive with raised voices or obvious enemies. It comes wrapped in familiar smiles, warm embraces, and words that sound comforting enough to lower your guard. You have sensed it before. Those quiet moments when a conversation ended, yet your spirit felt unexpectedly heavy. Those strange evenings when you celebrated a small victory, only to feel an invisible weight settle over your heart hours later. You blamed yourself. You questioned your own judgment. But what if those feelings were not born from fear at all? What if they were quiet signals that something hidden had been unfolding around you for far longer than you realized? Picture yourself standing in a room filled with people who claim to know your story. Laughter echoes against the walls, conversations overlap, and everything appears peaceful. Yet in one corner stands someone watching you with eyes that reveal more than words ever could. Every compliment they offer sounds perfect, but each sentence carries something impossible to explain, a subtle shadow that leaves confusion instead of comfort. You have wondered why certain opportunities disappeared without warning. Why relationships shifted after promising beginnings. Why misunderstandings seemed to find you even when you spoke honestly. You searched for complicated answers, never imagining they might all lead back to one familiar face. The strange part is that your heart never completely trusted what your eyes accepted. There were brief moments when silence felt louder than conversation. You remembered the way certain questions sounded less like curiosity and more like careful investigation. Who are you spending time with? What are your plans next month? Have you finally found peace? Innocent questions on the surface. Yet somehow, every answer you shared seemed to return to you carrying unexpected consequences. Doors quietly closed. Invitations disappeared. Confidence slipped away without explanation. You told yourself it was coincidence because believing anything else felt too painful. Then something unexpected began to change inside you. Instead of becoming weaker, you started noticing details you once overlooked. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. A smile that never reached someone's eyes. The strange discomfort that arrived whenever your dreams became larger. It was as though an unseen veil had begun lifting, revealing fragments of a picture that had remained incomplete for years. You were not becoming suspicious. You were becoming awake. And awakening always feels uncomfortable before it becomes freeing. Imagine walking through a dense forest before sunrise. The darkness convinces you every tree looks the same. Every path feels uncertain. But the first ray of morning light changes everything without moving a single branch. The landscape did not suddenly transform. The light simply revealed what had always been there. That is how hidden truth often arrives. Not through dramatic chaos, but through quiet clarity that cannot be ignored once it appears. Still, clarity comes with difficult questions. Why would someone so close hide disappointment behind encouragement? Why would your joy seem to create distance instead of celebration? Why did certain conversations leave you feeling smaller instead of stronger? These questions are uncomfortable because they force you to examine memories you carefully protected. Perhaps you remember sharing exciting news, only to receive a response that sounded supportive but somehow drained your excitement. Perhaps you noticed that your happiest moments were followed by unexpected conflict, as though unseen hands were gently pulling threads apart while pretending to help tie them together. One evening, in the stillness after everyone else had gone home, you found yourself replaying old conversations. Not because you wanted to judge anyone, but because something refused to let your heart rest. Words that once sounded harmless suddenly carried entirely different meanings. Compliments began to resemble comparisons. Advice sounded strangely discouraging. Even silence revealed things speech had carefully concealed. It felt less like discovering a secret and more like remembering something your soul had tried to whisper all along. But here is where the story turns. This is not a tale about revenge. It is not about becoming bitter or learning to fear everyone around you. Hidden truth has a purpose greater than exposing darkness. It prepares your heart to walk toward genuine peace. Sometimes the greatest protection is not removing every difficult person from your path. Sometimes it is simply seeing clearly enough that their hidden influence no longer controls your decisions. Yet one memory refuses to leave you. There was a single conversation one you nearly forgot. During that moment, someone close believed no one else was listening. Their expression changed. Their voice lost its carefully practiced warmth. And for just a heartbeat, the mask slipped. You dismissed it at the time because love often searches for excuses before it accepts uncomfortable reality. Now, that forgotten moment is returning with startling clarity. Because what was quietly spoken after you left that room, and the person who secretly heard every word, is about to change everything you believed about the relationship forever. And that truth has only just begun to surface. My beloved child. The memory returned without warning, not like a dream but like a forgotten melody carried by the wind. You were standing in the kitchen that afternoon, searching for nothing more than a glass of water, when familiar voices drifted from the next room. They were soft enough to escape careless ears, yet clear enough to leave an imprint on your heart forever. You had not intended to listen. In fact, you almost walked away. But then your own name was spoken with a tone you had never heard before, not with affection, not with concern, but with quiet calculation. The words themselves were ordinary, almost impossible to question on their own. It was everything surrounding them that unsettled you. There was a laugh that arrived a moment too late. There was a pause filled with satisfaction after someone mentioned one of your recent disappointments. Then came a sentence that seemed harmless to anyone else: they still have no idea. Silence followed, but somehow that silence spoke louder than the conversation itself. It settled into your spirit like rain sinking into dry ground, awakening questions you had buried beneath years of loyalty. For days afterward, you wrestled with yourself instead of anyone else. Surely there had to be another explanation. Love always searches for reasons to protect the people it treasures. You replayed birthdays, family dinners, shared victories, whispered promises, and childhood memories. Some moments still glowed with genuine warmth. Others now appeared strangely unfinished, as though important pieces had been missing all along. You realized something heartbreaking: kindness and hidden resentment can exist side by side for a season, making truth difficult to recognize until the right light finally arrives. Then another unexpected thread connected itself to the first. You remembered every opportunity that disappeared just before it reached your hands. Every misunderstanding that seemed to begin from nowhere. Every friendship that suddenly grew distant after someone else had quietly entered the conversation. None of those events proved anything on their own. Yet together they formed a pattern too precise to ignore. It was like standing on a hill after years of wandering through a maze. The paths that once looked random suddenly revealed a design stretching farther than you ever imagined. Still, your heart refused to become hard. Instead of filling you with anger, the growing picture stirred something far more complicated. Compassion. You began wondering what kind of hidden emptiness causes a person to fear another's joy. What unseen wounds convince someone that another's blessing somehow threatens their own peace? You realized that brokenness often disguises itself as control. Envy rarely announces its arrival. It smiles, applauds, offers advice, and waits patiently for the perfect moment to redirect someone else's confidence away from their calling. One evening, as golden light faded beyond your window, you imagined two gardens growing beside one another. One gardener celebrated every new blossom. The other spent so much energy watching the neighboring flowers that their own soil slowly dried beneath their feet. Neither garden changed overnight. The difference appeared one quiet day at a time, hidden inside countless small choices. In that image, something inside you finally understood that another person's struggle did not define your future. Their shadows could only follow you as long as you mistook them for your own. Just when peace began replacing confusion, another piece of the story surfaced. Someone you never expected reached out with visible hesitation. They carried no desire to create conflict, only the weight of something they had witnessed for too long. Their hands trembled as they admitted they had almost spoken months earlier but feared no one would believe them. They described conversations held behind closed doors, moments when concern became criticism, encouragement became comparison, and private details you had shared in confidence somehow became topics for hidden discussion. You listened without interruption, not because every answer had arrived, but because every missing piece seemed to recognize the others. The story was becoming clearer, yet the deepest revelation remained untouched. Before leaving, that quiet witness paused at the doorway, turned back, and spoke one final sentence. There was one thing they never wanted you to discover, because the day you learn it is the day their influence over your life begins to disappear. The room fell silent. And somewhere, at that very same moment, another conversation had already begun, one that would reveal not only what had been hidden from you, but why it started long before you ever suspected anything at all. My beloved child. Sleep refused to settle over you that night. Not because fear had taken hold, but because your heart had begun asking questions that could no longer be ignored. Outside your window, the world rested beneath a quiet sky, yet within you, forgotten memories stirred like pages of an old journal turning on their own. You realized that truth rarely rushes into someone's life all at once. It arrives gently, allowing the heart enough time to become strong enough to carry it. The following morning brought no dramatic sign, no thunder, no extraordinary event. Instead, clarity appeared through something almost invisible. You noticed how peace entered the room only after certain conversations ended. You noticed how your confidence returned whenever you stopped seeking approval from the very person whose opinions had quietly shaped your doubts. It was as though an unseen burden had been resting on your shoulders for years, and only now did you understand it had never belonged to you. Then came an encounter you never expected. An elderly woman crossed your path while waiting in a small cafe. She smiled with the kind of warmth that asks for nothing in return. After a brief conversation, she looked at you thoughtfully and said, "Some people don't fear your weakness. They fear the day you finally recognize your strength." The words were simple. Yet they echoed through your heart long after you left. You began remembering moments from childhood that had once seemed too ordinary to matter. Times when your achievements were quietly minimized. Moments when your dreams were met with polite smiles instead of genuine excitement. Small comparisons that slowly convinced you to become quieter, smaller, easier to overlook. None of those memories had seemed important on their own. Together, however, they revealed a pattern that had shaped the way you viewed yourself without your realizing it. For the first time, you stopped asking, "Why would someone do this?" Instead, you asked, "Why did I believe I deserved less than I was created for?" That single question changed everything. You discovered that the deepest wound was never the hidden disappointment of another person. It was the habit of measuring your worth through their reactions. Every time they celebrated you, you felt secure. Every time they withdrew affection, you questioned yourself. Without noticing, you had handed someone else the authority to define a value that had always belonged within your own heart. As this realization settled, something unexpected happened. The anger you thought would consume you never arrived. Instead, compassion quietly took its place. You imagined the loneliness of someone who constantly compares, competes, and hides behind carefully chosen words. What an exhausting way to live. To spend more energy watching another person's light than discovering your own. That understanding did not excuse hurtful choices, but it freed your heart from becoming trapped by them. You understood that forgiveness does not erase wisdom. It simply refuses to let bitterness become your future. Just when you believed the story had reached its deepest point, another piece emerged. A dusty box tucked away in an old closet caught your attention while searching for something entirely unrelated. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes, and forgotten keepsakes from years gone by. As you turned each page, one small envelope slipped onto the floor. Your name was written across the front. The handwriting was unmistakable. But the message inside was unlike anything you expected. It wasn't addressed to you. It was about you. And the final sentence revealed that someone had been carefully shaping how others saw you long before you were old enough to understand what was happening. With trembling hands, you reached the signature at the bottom. And everything you believed about the past was about to be rewritten. My beloved child. Your fingers hesitated before unfolding the fragile letter, as though some part of your heart already understood that life would never look quite the same afterward. The paper had yellowed with time, carrying the faint scent of old books and forgotten seasons. Whoever wrote it never expected you to read those words. They believed the truth would remain hidden forever. The opening lines were gentle, almost ordinary. They spoke of family gatherings, shared memories, and hopes for the future. But beneath the warmth rested something colder. Sentence by sentence, the writer described how easily people's opinions could be guided if they only heard one version of a story often enough. There were no dramatic accusations, only subtle admissions that certain impressions had been planted long before you ever had the chance to speak for yourself. It was not one devastating moment that shaped your reputation. It was countless quiet moments, carefully scattered over many years. As you lowered the letter, another memory surfaced with startling clarity. You remembered walking into rooms where conversations abruptly stopped. You remembered relatives exchanging quick glances before smiling too brightly. As a child, you believed everyone experienced those awkward moments. Later, you blamed your own imagination. Now you saw those memories from a different perspective, not with resentment, but with understanding. Pieces that had never seemed connected suddenly formed a picture that explained years of quiet confusion. Yet something inside you refused to become consumed by the past. Instead of asking why those moments happened, you found yourself wondering how many beautiful opportunities still waited ahead now that hidden burdens were beginning to fall away. The future suddenly felt larger than the history that had tried to define it. You sensed that healing was not inviting you to relive every painful chapter. It was inviting you to stop living as though those chapters still held authority over your life. Then an unexpected visitor arrived. A family friend you had not seen in years appeared at your doorstep carrying an old photo album. Their expression held both relief and hesitation, as though they had spent a long time deciding whether this meeting should ever happen. After a long silence, they admitted there had always been things they wished they had questioned sooner. They spoke carefully, never trying to persuade you toward anger. Instead, they shared moments they had witnessed, small incidents that once seemed insignificant but now carried entirely different meaning. There was always one person, they said quietly, who seemed uncomfortable whenever your name was followed by good news. The room fell silent again. Not because those words shocked you, but because your heart had already begun preparing itself to hear them. The visitor turned another page in the album. There you were as a child, smiling without fear, standing beside people you believed would always celebrate your happiness. Looking at that younger version of yourself stirred something deeper than sadness. It awakened compassion. You realized that child deserved protection, encouragement, and truth. Perhaps the greatest act of healing was finally giving your younger self the kindness that had sometimes been missing from the voices around you. As evening settled outside, the visitor reached into the album one final time and removed a photograph hidden between two pages. At first glance, it looked completely ordinary. Then your eyes noticed what had escaped everyone else's attention. In the background, barely visible, stood someone watching you, not with joy, not with pride, but with an expression that matched the hidden pattern now stretching across years of memories. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten date, the exact week everything in your family dynamics quietly began to change. But that wasn't what made your breath catch. Folded behind the photograph was another note. Unlike the first letter, this one contained only a single sentence. When the truth finally reaches them, they will discover it was never only about jealousy, there was another secret no one has dared to reveal. And that secret was waiting in the next chapter. My beloved child. The single sentence lingered in your thoughts long after the room had fallen silent. It was not the kind of mystery that demanded reckless conclusions. Instead, it invited patience. You sensed that rushing toward judgment would only cloud the very clarity you had been receiving. So you placed the note back on the table, closed your eyes, and allowed yourself to breathe through the weight of everything that had surfaced. For the first time in years, you were no longer chasing answers out of desperation. You were learning to let truth reveal itself one step at a time. The next few days unfolded with unusual stillness. Nothing dramatic happened on the outside, yet everything inside you was changing. Conversations that once pulled you into defending yourself no longer carried the same power. You noticed how often you had explained your intentions simply to be understood. Now you realized that people committed to misunderstanding you rarely changed their minds because of one more explanation. Peace began replacing the exhausting need to convince everyone of your heart. Then something unexpected happened. A message arrived from someone you had not heard from in years. They were neither close family nor a distant stranger, just someone who had quietly observed your life from the edges. Their words were brief, almost hesitant. "I've been carrying something for a long time. I think you deserve to know. You agreed to meet." There was no dramatic confrontation waiting for you. Only an honest conversation between two people who had both grown older since the memories they discussed. The person explained that years ago they had noticed a pattern they could never fully understand. Whenever opportunities appeared for you, someone else would often reshape the story before it reached the rest of the family. Small details were exaggerated. Honest mistakes were repeated far longer than your victories. Little by little, an image was created that never completely matched the person they had actually come to know. "What confused me most," they admitted softly, "was that it didn't seem to come from hatred." You looked up. It came from fear. Those words settled deeply within you. Fear can wear many disguises. Sometimes it appears as control. Sometimes as comparison. Sometimes as the quiet belief that another person's growth somehow diminishes your own. Suddenly, the pieces no longer pointed toward a simple story of betrayal. They revealed something far more tragic: a heart trapped inside its own insecurity, unable to celebrate another person's light without feeling its own had grown dim. That realization changed the direction of your emotions completely. Instead of standing at the edge of revenge, you found yourself standing at the doorway of freedom. Freedom did not mean pretending painful things never happened. It meant refusing to carry them any farther than necessary. You understood that healing is not built by exposing every hidden wound to the world. It is built by allowing truth to remove the chains that false stories once wrapped around your identity. Later that evening, while sorting through the remaining papers from the old box, you discovered a calendar with several dates circled in faded ink. At first, they seemed random. Birthdays, family gatherings, celebrations. But after comparing them with old photographs and letters, a striking pattern emerged. Every circled date marked a turning point in your life. The first job you almost accepted. The friendship that unexpectedly ended. The opportunity that disappeared without explanation. The day you nearly gave up on a dream that later became one of your greatest blessings. Someone had been paying close attention to the milestones of your journey. Tucked inside the back cover of the calendar was a folded receipt. On the reverse side, a single handwritten line appeared in the same familiar handwriting you had seen before. They must never discover why those dates truly mattered. As you turned the paper over, you realized another page had been carefully hidden beneath it. And that hidden page contained a name you had never expected to see, one capable of changing not only your understanding of the past, but the future that was waiting to unfold. My beloved child. For several moments, you simply stared at the name written across the hidden page. It was not the name itself that shook you, it was what it represented. Suddenly, years that had seemed disconnected began aligning like stars finally visible after a storm had passed. The mystery was no longer about one difficult relationship. It was about an invisible current that had quietly influenced countless choices, misunderstandings, and missed connections throughout your life. Yet the page held more than a single name. Beneath it were brief notes, written over many different years. Some were only a few words long. Others looked like unfinished thoughts, interrupted before they could be completed. Together they painted a heartbreaking picture of someone wrestling with emotions they never learned how to express in healthy ways. There were moments of admiration mixed with comparison. Moments of affection tangled with insecurity. It became clear that the conflict had never begun because your light was too bright. It had begun because someone believed there was not enough light for both of you. That realization softened something inside your heart. You finally understood that another person's struggle had never been proof that something was wrong with you. For too long, you had carried invisible questions. Am I too much? Should I make myself smaller? Would everything be easier if I stopped dreaming so boldly? Those questions quietly shaped your decisions without your noticing. But now they dissolved like morning mist beneath the rising sun. Your purpose had never required permission from someone else's fear. As the afternoon faded into evening, you found yourself returning to places that once held painful memories. The old park where you questioned your future. The quiet street where you doubted your own worth. The bench where you once sat wondering why life felt heavier than it seemed for everyone else. Standing there now, you noticed something extraordinary. The places had not changed. You had. The weight that once belonged to those memories no longer followed you. They had become landmarks of survival rather than reminders of defeat. Then your phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to someone older, a respected member of the community who had known your family for decades. Their tone carried neither gossip nor excitement, only quiet sincerity. "There is something I've wanted to tell you for many years," they said. "I stayed silent because I believed time would heal everything. But healing also needs truth." You listened carefully. They explained that long ago, several people had privately recognized tensions within the family. Most assumed they would fade with time. Instead, misunderstandings were allowed to grow because no one wanted uncomfortable conversations. Small wounds became deep divides. Honest communication gave way to assumptions. The silence that was meant to preserve peace had unknowingly protected confusion instead. When the call ended, you remained still. A surprising peace settled over you. Not because every question had been answered, but because you finally realized your future did not depend on solving every mystery from the past. Some answers exist to teach wisdom, not to imprison the heart. Just as you prepared to place the hidden documents back into the box, one final item caught your attention. It was a sealed envelope unlike the others. Across the front, in faded handwriting, were 7 simple words. "Open only when you're ready to forgive completely." Your heartbeat slowed. Somehow, you knew that whatever rested inside this final envelope would reveal not only the deepest secret behind everything that had happened, but also the unexpected reason your own journey had prepared you to break a cycle that had quietly affected generations. With trembling hands, you reached for the seal. And the greatest revelation was waiting just beyond it. My beloved child. The seal released with barely a sound, yet it felt as though an entire lifetime had just exhaled. Inside the envelope was not a confession, nor a list of accusations. It contained a worn journal page, folded carefully to protect words that had waited years to be read. The handwriting carried hesitation, as if every sentence had been written by someone struggling against their own heart. The first line stopped you completely. The hardest battle in this family was never between people. It was between love and fear. You continued reading in silence. The writer described a history stretching back long before your own memories began. Generation after generation, comparison had quietly replaced celebration. Success became competition. Kindness became suspicion. Every unresolved hurt was passed forward like an invisible inheritance. No one had intended to continue the cycle. They simply repeated what they themselves had received, believing it was normal. Suddenly, the story became much larger than one relationship. It became the story of a family that had forgotten how to rejoice in one another without measuring themselves against each other. As those words settled into your spirit, something unexpected happened. You stopped seeing yourself as the center of the pain. Instead, you saw yourself standing at the edge of a long chain that had stretched across decades. Every broken expectation, every quiet rivalry, every misunderstood conversation had become another link. The realization did not erase the hurt you carried, but it changed its meaning. You were no longer looking at isolated moments. You were witnessing a pattern that had survived because no one had been willing to face it with honesty and compassion at the same time. Then your eyes reached a paragraph that had been underlined twice. One day, someone will choose peace instead of proving they were right. When that day comes, this family will begin healing in ways none of us lived long enough to see. You closed the journal for a moment. The room felt strangely still. It was not silence born from emptiness. It was the kind of silence that arrives after a storm has finally moved beyond the horizon. For the first time, you understood that strength is not measured by how perfectly you expose every hidden wrong. Real strength appears when truth gives you clear vision without stealing your capacity to love wisely. You could set healthy boundaries without carrying hatred. You could recognize unhealthy patterns without allowing them to define your identity. You could move forward without pretending the past never existed. Just then, a soft knock interrupted your thoughts. Standing outside your door was someone you never expected to see. Their face carried the unmistakable weight of regret. Before you could speak, they quietly placed a small wooden box into your hands. "I found this while clearing out old belongings," they whispered. "I think it belongs with you." Without waiting for a response, they turned and walked away. Inside the box rested a delicate silver key attached to a faded ribbon. Beneath it lay a tiny card with only one sentence written across it. "Some doors protect secrets. Others protect healing. You'll soon discover the difference." You turned the key over in your palm, wondering what lock it could possibly open. Then, almost unnoticed beneath the velvet lining, your fingertips brushed against a folded map. It marked one forgotten place from your childhood. A place you had not visited in years. A place where someone had hidden one final piece of the story. And deep within your heart, you sensed that what awaited you there would not simply explain the past. It would reveal why your future had been quietly protected all along. My beloved child. The path to that forgotten place felt strangely familiar, as though every step had been waiting for this moment. The old building stood quietly beneath towering trees, untouched by the rush of time. Dust covered the windows, and gentle sunlight filtered through the branches, painting the ground with shifting patterns of gold. As you reached the weathered door, your hand instinctively found the silver key. It turned without resistance. Inside, the room was simple. No hidden treasure. No dramatic evidence. Only a small wooden table, a chair, and one final journal resting beneath a beam of light. You sat down, opened its pages, and discovered that the last chapter of this story had never been about exposing another person. It had always been about setting you free. The journal revealed that someone in your family had recognized the unhealthy pattern years earlier. They had written honestly about how comparison, insecurity, and unspoken pain had quietly shaped relationships across generations. They admitted that silence allowed those wounds to continue, but they also wrote something that changed everything. If you are reading this, then the cycle has finally reached someone strong enough to end it, not through revenge, but through truth wrapped in compassion. Tears filled your eyes, not because the past suddenly disappeared, but because it finally made sense. You realized that the greatest victory was never proving who was right or wrong. The greatest victory was refusing to let someone else's brokenness determine the kind of person you would become. The hurt you experienced was real. The confusion was real. But neither of them had the authority to write the ending of your life. You quietly laid every letter, photograph, and note back into the box. They no longer felt like weapons. They had become reminders. Reminders that discernment is different from bitterness. That forgiveness does not require pretending painful things never happened. That healthy boundaries can exist alongside a heart that still chooses peace. When you stepped outside, the evening sky stretched endlessly above you. The air felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, you stopped looking behind you for answers and began looking ahead with expectation. You understood that some relationships may change. Some may heal. Others may remain distant. But your future no longer depended on any of those outcomes. It depended on the choices you would make from this day forward. You chose honesty over fear. You chose wisdom over suspicion. You chose peace over endless conflict. And in making those choices, you became the person that younger version of yourself had always needed. As you walked away, your phone vibrated one final time. There was no mysterious message. Only a simple reminder you had written to yourself long ago and forgotten. Never let another person's shadows convince you to hide your own light. You smiled. Not because every question had been answered, but because the most important one had. You finally knew who you were. And no hidden voice, no old misunderstanding, no painful chapter from yesterday could ever take that truth away again. If this story found you at exactly the right moment, perhaps its purpose was never to make you fear the people around you, but to encourage you to seek truth with humility, protect your peace with wisdom, and keep your heart open to healing. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not that every relationship changes, it is that you do. May your path be filled with discernment without fear, courage without anger, peace that remains steady through every season, and love that is guided by wisdom. May you recognize your worth, walk confidently in your purpose, and become a source of light wherever life leads you. If this fictional story encouraged your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a message of hope today. Until next time, may peace, strength, and abundant blessings walk with you every step of your journey.